tell us a bit about CERT NZ, and because it's obviously you could look at that and it's a pretty stark picture of you've got digital attacks from all over the world, organised entities basically having a go at us. How's CERT positioned to help improve our cybersecurity?
Thanks. Good question.
Yeah.
Tell we've rehearsed this.
Yeah.
I was just listening to Victoria talk about how NZRise has evolved, and I think CERT is really much a government mirror example of that. Just very, very quickly, it was back in 2015. There was a cyber security summit which brought together business leaders and people interested in cyber to discuss and debate a whole range of technology related issues impacting New Zealand. And one of the outcomes of that summit was that a very strong demand or drive for a CERT NZ entity to actually assist in some of the issues that have been identified around the New Zealand ecosystem, cyber ecosystem. So that was the government of the day, just identifying that there are gaps in terms of how, from a public protection perspective, where New Zealanders and businesses being properly looked after in terms of their cyber issues. So that evolved into CERT NZ being established, and primarily we're there to provide an incident response and triage service for individuals, businesses, to develop a more comprehensive understanding of the cyber landscape. And that's come through very, very strongly in terms of the fact that we've got a very fragmented understanding of what's actually occurring in New Zealand from a New Zealand perspective. We rely an awful lot on international trends and international commentaries, but we actually don't have New Zealand reliable data that actually help us in terms of the way we develop interventions, initiatives and programs. International collaboration, recognising and acknowledging that this is a global issue and we need to be connected to like-minded countries and like-minded organisations for the purposes of information sharing and actually managing incidents as they occur. One of the critical things that we have actually done in terms of establishing is we've purposely designed the operating model for CERT so that we do not actually have a connection with the intelligence communities. And that might sound a bit weird, but what came through very strongly, the sentiment came through strongly from the cybersecurity summit from the private sector, was that there's a degree of hesitation, mistrust or cynicism about any agency that was connected in an intelligence form around cyber. So in order for us to give effect to helping New Zealanders, helping businesses, we've made a clear demarcation between working in the open side, open source, publicly available information versus the speech marks dark side. It doesn't mean we don't have an understanding of or awareness of what in fact is occurring on the restricted side, but what we do, we've realised to be effective is we have to very quickly filter issues or incidents that are occurring real time and try and communicate that out to the public, to businesses about what's actually happening so that they can then take steps to shore up their different security issues or take other steps. So that's been a very helpful and prescient sort of step, I think, in terms of trying to build some of that trust and confidence in what we actually do. Just in terms of CERT, the other key function of ours is to act as a no wrong door. The experience of everybody has had some sort of a cyber issue previously. There's a lot of confusion about who to report to or where to report to. And that's, I spoke earlier about fragmentation. we do have a very fragmented cyber ecosystem in New Zealand. We have police for cyber crime, we've got NetSafe for harmful digital, we've got DIA for online abuse stuff, we've got the Privacy Commissioner for privacy. It goes on and on and on. And with that comes confusion and concern about, well, if I've got this issue, where do I go? So we've actually set ourselves up to be a central reporting point for people or businesses to relay what their issue is. We've got good technical capabilities to understand what the issue is, remediate what we can at the time, and then act as a referral agency through to police or NetSafe or DIA, so that they can then follow through within their remit. And the important message about that is we're not wanting to duplicate or complicate an already complicated, crowded space, but try and simplify and coordinate so that a New Zealander, be it a business or an individual, can get a better service than perhaps what they have been provided so far.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think when we were talking about sort of the evolution of the group, which is obviously, you know, been around for 4 years or so, there's and comparing and contrasting that with your previous role in the police, which was quite a lot heavily focused on prosecution, right?
Yep.
It's actually finding the perpetrator and holding them to account.
Yep.
And you talked a bit about that. Really, your focus is much more on prevention here rather than prosecution, and it might be worth just digging into that as to why that's important and why you have to prioritize that.
Well, absolutely, thanks. I think everyone in this room and listening will realise and understand that in such an incredibly ubiquitous environment like cyber, and the speed with which individuals and organised groups can operate, the ability to detect and apprehend is significantly different to the old days of someone putting a double-barrel shotgun out a window and then riding off on a bike, and somebody seeing who they are, and you can detect them, pick them up pretty quickly. But the reality is with cyber crime and all its different forms, it's incredibly difficult to actually detect. So we've got this tension and challenge, conflict between the public interest about expectation of detection and bringing people to account for the bads they've done to society, versus the realities about where are we best going to put public money to actually prevent what should not have occurred in the first place. So that involves quite a big shift of thinking in terms of how do we go about the business of managing cyber issues in a more effective, more cost-relevant way, and ultimately, what are we actually looking for? Planned obsolescence, I think, is an absolutely artificial idea, but that's what we should be going for. I mean, everybody in this room should actually not have a role ultimately, and should be looking for jobs somewhere else. But we know that's not the case. It's but how do we actually reduce harms and prevent some of these issues occurring in the first place? And it's the simple things like password security, multi-factor authentication, general awareness, behaviours. All of these things do have an impact in terms of how ripe and rich the plucking pasture is for these criminal groups. So prevention is really, really important, and I think that leads us to a few ways in which we've been looking at how we might actually minimise the harms and impacts and the compromises that are actually occurring around the world, and more particularly in New Zealand. So the prevention is better than cure. Pipeline always beats product, and if we can starve these people from incentives and the attraction of a country that looks like it's right for the plucking, then we're doing our job. And I think we all have a common public interest in how hard can we make our cyber border, how resilient can we be, and how aware and reactive and adaptive are we to new security practices that actually make us an unattractive target.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Making us a target that people go, actually, I'd much rather put my effort in somewhere else where I'm going to get a better return. It's obviously a super fast moving space. And you're reliant probably on things like legislation, which is not so fast moving. How do you manage that sort of paradox, I guess, of being able to live in that world?
Well, you made an assumption there, which I would have made too, and coming from a police background where you rely so much on legislation and powers to act. CERT NZ has actually been developed without any legislative or regulatory powers whatsoever. And I was a bit horrified when I first heard that. I thought, how on earth can we operate? And I must admit, it's the best platform that we can operate from, because to the greater aim of creating a strong and effective cyber resilience shell for New Zealand, the best way in terms of prevention is trust and confidence in services, and bringing people with you. And we're very, very strong on wanting to develop partnerships and actually collaborating with people to understand what we're trying to do and bring them with us, as opposed to doing things to them. So unusually, we're a government department, which is probably more helpful than most. And we are wanting to build on the trust and collaboration and partnership component. And a lot of the stuff that needs to be done in terms of cyber resilience is nothing more than behavioural change or organisational reposturing to ensure that good practice, best practice, cybersecurity protocols and processes are in place, and that there's an awareness about how things can be changed if necessary to continue to lift the cyber resilience of New Zealand.